Hi, in this video I'm going to explain the basics of how to EQ properly. I'm going to show you the different types of EQ curves and the various parameters you have at your disposal so that you can improve your mixes. At the end of the video I'm going to share some tips and some examples of equalization curves that I've done in some of my mixing projects. My name is Tiago Duarte and welcome to Daily Beats, where I help you master the software so that it's just you and music. If you are new to the channel, subscribe and activate the notifications so that you are up to date with all the videos I publish about music production. If you want to support the channel, consider buying one of the products at dailybeats.pt or become a member of the channel. For only $3.99 a month, you will have access to all the premium videos I do to the channel. You will learn how to make professional beats, professional mixes, and mastering. I recently uploaded a new Start to Finish series for premium members only, showing my entire mixing and mastering process. I will have a link in the description if you want to check it out. Equalization is the process of adjusting the volume of different frequency bands of audio. This helps us to adjust the timbre of individual instruments and vocals to fit all the audio tracks within the overall frequency spectrum of the mix. In music production, you will find a huge variety of equalizer plugins, but for this tutorial I'm going to focus on the Fruity Parametric EQ2, which is the best and most versatile EQ plugin in FL Studio. To adjust the volume of different frequency bands, there are two obvious parameters that the Fruity Parametric EQ2 has. They are gain and frequency. The gain allows us to boost or cut the volume, and the frequency allows us to set which frequency range the gain will be applied. For example, if I grab the gain and frequency knob, you can see that I can boost or cut the gain and move the center frequency around. On the right of the EQ, you have the gain and frequency knobs and two separate controllers. The vertical sliders are the gain of each of the 7 bands, and the knobs below are the frequency knobs. The last row of knobs sets the bandwidth of each of the 7 bands. The bandwidth controls the width of the filter. With a wider width, you affect more frequencies, and with a narrow width, you affect fewer frequencies. The Fruity Parametric EQ2 has 8 different types of curves. For each of the 7 bands, you can select the different types of curves with the switch at the top. When I started making music on a DAW, it was hard for me to understand why there were so many EQ curves and when to use them. I would go to concerts and I would see racks of gear and have no idea what they were doing. As I began reading and watching tutorials, I started to piece together the puzzle and the world of music production started to unfold in front of me. With some patience, you can get there too. Let's now check the different types of EQ curves. The low pass filters the high frequencies starting from the cutoff filter, which you can set by changing the frequency knob at the bottom. I use this curve when I need to cut high frequencies from basses and leave only the low end, for example. The bandpass allows a narrow band to pass on each side of the cutoff. I use this curve when I want to adjust a narrow range of frequencies to be audible and more for sound design, not necessarily for mixing. The high pass filters the low frequencies starting at the cutoff. I use this curve a lot in my productions and in pretty much all my tracks. After I mix the low end the way I want, I don't want any sound interfering with the bass and the kick. By applying a high pass filter to all of the other sounds, I make sure that the bass frequencies stay the way I want. After I started doing that, my bass lines became way more solid and tight. The notch cuts the frequencies around the cutoff. I rarely use this EQ curve because it tends to be very aggressive with the cut. As you can see, there is no gain knob anymore and the gain goes way below -20 dB. I do use it sometimes for sound design to change the original sound. The low shelf is similar to a bass EQ that you find on a car, auto, radio, or on an audio player app on a smartphone. It boosts or cuts the frequencies below the cutoff frequency. I use this curve mostly when I'm mastering to control the low end of the stereo field of the mix. The picking allows you to boost or cut frequencies around the cutoff. This is the default for bands 2 to 5 of the 7 bands on the Fruity Parametric EQ2. This is the curve I use the most while mixing, because it allows me to control the gain, the frequency, and the width of the curve. The high shelf is similar to the treble EQ, and it works the opposite of the bass EQ in terms of the frequencies that affect. The bass EQ affects the low frequencies, and the treble EQ affects the high frequencies. I have shown you the basics of equalization using the Fruity Parametric EQ2 in FL Studio. But now I want to switch to Studio One, so that I can show you some examples of how I use equalization in my mixes. I use FL Studio to make beats, and then I switch to Studio One to mix all the music I work on. When you understand the basic concepts of equalization, you will be able to use any equalizer in any DAW that you choose. Let's take a look at the drums and bass of one of my beats called Dark Passenger. The equalizer on the left refers to the drums and the equalizer on the right refers to the bass. I like to mix in groups, so I put all the drums in a group and mix that as an individual track. The drums equalization is very simple. I boost the low end and reduce some middle frequencies. As you can see, I use mostly picking curves for the drums with different gains and different widths. The bass EQ curve looks a little bit more complex. I have one high pass to cut some of the low end that I cannot hear and the low pass to remove any unwanted high frequencies. I then use some picking curves to boost around 100 Hz and around 1 kHz, and two more to cut around 200 and 450 Hz. When I boost, I tend to use larger widths, and when cutting I tend to use smaller widths to be more precise. Let's hear how it sounds with and without the effects. As you can hear, the low end loses power and the basses lose intensity. This is a good example of how small adjustments can make a big difference in the end. The next example I have for you is a remix track I did for a friend of mine called Zeka. When I was mixing this track, I wanted to make sure that the piano progression would cut through the mix. I wanted the piano to shine and give a nice aura to the entire track. I felt that the piano needed some work. This is the equalization that I've applied to the piano. As you can see, I have a low cut to make sure that I don't have any unwanted frequencies messing up my bass and kick. I then added two picking cuts and a picking boost. Finally, I added a high shelf to make the piano brighter. This made the piano more present in the mix and complemented the vocal really well. Let's hear with and without the effects.
Embora não vou mantendo-me na caminhada que estou. Sou apenas mais e dou o meu contributo a isto, porque isto nunca me deixou. Embora não vou mantendo-me na caminhada que estou. Sou apenas mais e dou o meu contributo a isto, porque isto nunca me deixou. Embora não vou mantendo-me na caminhada que estou. Sou apenas mais e dou o meu contributo a isto, porque isto nunca me deixou. Embora não vou mantendo-me na caminhada que estou. Sou apenas mais e dou o meu contributo a isto, porque isto nunca me deixou.
As you can hear, when I remove the effects, the piano is more heavy bass and gets lost in the mix because it's fighting for space against the vocal. When I bring up the high frequencies of the piano the fight is over. We can clearly hear both the vocals and the piano. This makes a big difference to the mood of the track and makes it way more melodic and nicer. Thanks for watching the video until the end. If you learned something with this video, please leave a like and let me know in the comments what you would like me to talk about next. If you want to support this channel, subscribe and activate the notifications so that you stay up to date with Daily Beats, where I teach you how to master the software so that it's just you and music. Peace.